Ready Player One is a new movie based off a best-selling book by Ernest Cline, and it is directed by a little indie filmmaker you might know of named Steven Spielberg. And this movie stars a whole bunch of people that are, some of them are no-name actors, some of them are big-name actors like Simon Pegg and Mark Rylance. There is a big cast in this movie, and some of them are no-names, which I found to be very cool. Like, I had no idea who a lot of people were in this movie, actually, and I was like, hey, you're giving recognition to new actors. And this movie's a little bit hard to explain, but I'm gonna try my best. It's basically about how it's in the future, it's in the 2040s, and it is in this crappy reality that nobody likes. It's in this reality that is really boring and bland, and everything is just not good, but they have this way to escape, which is the Oasis, which was a whole virtual reality universe that was created by Mark Rylance's character. And this whole universe is basically a gigantic game. Like, this whole different universe is this game to complete these challenges and these tasks. And then when they win this challenge, they get to have all control of the Oasis. They get to basically control how it's done and what it's like. And everyone in this futuristic society is addicted to this, especially the main character who has a really crappy home life, so he goes in the Oasis all the time in order to escape. So guys, Ready Player One was a movie I was really looking forward to. I mean, it's directed by Steven Spielberg. I don't even need to say anything about Steven Spielberg. He's Steven Spielberg. Everybody knows his name. Even if you're not a film buff, you usually know who Steven Spielberg is. There's not really anything I need to say there. But also, besides that, it's based off a book that had a really cool concept. When I heard about this book and the concept and the story and the whole idea of this virtual reality that can make any dreams you want come true, because the creator of this Oasis grew up in the 80s, so he puts all kinds of 80s stuff in this universe. And I had a blast with Ready Player One. This is a very enjoyable movie. It's definitely not flawless though, but it is a really enjoyable movie. And the best part about Ready Player One is the universe. You wish this universe was real. It makes me question whether I'd be okay with this crappy reality in the future if I was able to be in the Oasis and do all the stuff in the Oasis that everyone is able to do. It's one of those universes that just makes you wish it was real. It's kind of like Harry Potter in the sense that you wish that you could be a part of this universe. You wish you could get involved with this. But you need to have more than just a really good universe to sell a movie. You need to be able to have really good characters, and this movie I think has those. They're not the best characters I've ever seen in film, but they are some really enjoyable characters that you can relate to, especially the lead character. I thought he was very well done. There are some problems with him that I will get into later. He's not a perfect character. He's the guy that basically leads this whole movie. He's just a naive young kid that is really lonely in his real life, and he just wants to have friends, he wants to be in relationships, he wants somebody to have besides his crappy family life. In that sense, he's really interesting. We also have the girl character, I forget her name already, I'm terrible with names, but she was also really good. They had this whole theme with her character that I don't want to spoil because I didn't know about it going in, because I only saw the teaser for this movie, so it was really great seeing this thing without having seen anything. But she has this really interesting arc in this movie about how you may be disappointed with what you see in real life. And online avatars of people online can be masked. They can be different than what they actually are in real life. Like, so many people are using the internet nowadays, there's all kinds of social media all over the place, and we all have this digital self that is online. We have this digital self that is making decisions, and you can mask your digital self in any way you want. You can mask anything about yourself in personal life. You can just create your own person, basically. And Ready Player One explored that beautifully. It's definitely a satire on internet use and how it's consuming so many people, and there's a really good message around that too. The action and the visuals were fantastic. This movie honestly should be nominated for visual effects at the Oscars next year. I will be angry if it doesn't, because every shot in this movie looks fantastic. This movie is basically, a lot of it is basically an animated movie in a way, because there's so much CG. Like, there are obviously live action sequences and there's a lot of motion capture and stuff like that, but this movie is mostly CG. And definitely in the real world they use a lot of actual sets, which was really cool. But most of the movie takes place in the Oasis, so a lot of the time this feels like an animated movie. And usually when that happens, I get worried that the visuals aren't gonna look good. I feel worried that there's gonna be obvious green screen and obvious CG that isn't polished enough, but there wasn't one single shot in this movie that I saw personally that felt fake. It all looked so real and it all looked so authentic. Like, the imagination behind this universe was so well done. There's also great humor, too. Like, there's this whole sequence that is parodying an old movie. I'm not gonna say anything else about that. My favorite scene in the movie. It was incredibly brilliant, and it is like, it's gonna be one of my favorite scenes of the entire year, I think, honestly. I'm being completely honest, even though I haven't seen anything this year because we're only in March, and there's so many references to other pop culture things. It's kind of like Wreck-It Ralph, where there's so many pop culture references all over the place to video games, and this movie isn't just video games, because it can be so vast. Like, it can be anything that you want it to be. So there's references to old movies, there's references to video games too. There's references to anime, there's references to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there's references to Spielberg's old movies too, and obviously there's so many references to the 80s, which is probably my favorite decade ever. This movie is a nerd's dream. Like, there's so much nerdism in this movie. Like, there's so many moments where I was like, ha, that's that thing from that movie, that's this, I understood that reference. And it's never really distracting, because part of the whole movie is built on doing references to things. Like, that's kind of what Ready Player One is. It's a whole universe created by a guy that lived in the 80s. And the guy that created all this stuff is kind of an awkward nerd, and he loves all kinds of things that nerds love. Like, you watch scenes with Mark Rylance in them of him playing this character, and he's such an awkward nerd. It really is a love letter to awkward nerds. Awkward, weird nerds that so many masculine football players are like, hey, you're a dork. Pfft, screw you. Ernest Cline, I would assume, is incredibly nerdy, and he loves movies, and so does Steven Spielberg. I mean, Steven Spielberg is one of the most iconic filmmakers of all time, and he's made so many classics that it was a perfect choice to pick him for this movie. Like I said, Ready Player One is not a perfect movie. I think it could have been better than it was. I feel like this movie could have been incredible with maybe someone like Edgar Wright behind it. That would have been so... Like, I love Spielberg and everything, but Edgar Wright making this movie would have been... Holy... I didn't even think of that until just now. I just barely... Edgar Wright came into my brain, and I'm like, yes! This movie has so much exposition, and it's kind of a given, because a universe like this takes a lot of explaining to understand. But it does hinder the movie. Like, a lot of the times, there's just narration, where the guy is just narrating, and he's just telling us things, and it's just like, yeah, like, a lot of this stuff you're telling us doesn't really need to be told to us. Like, we could have understood it on our own. Like, there's literally scenes where it's being narrated by the main character, and he's explaining things about the Oasis, and we can see those things on screen and put together in our heads that these things can happen. Like, we understand everything that he's saying without him even saying it. A lot of the times the exposition felt a little bit unnecessary just to ensure that we get it, that we understand it, even though we would be able to figure this stuff out on our own. There's way too much stuff like that. It reminded me a little bit of in the Star Wars prequels, where constantly Anakin has to speak his mind. Like, he can't, like, we can't...
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
It's obviously not as bad as that. It's not even close to as bad as that, but there are a lot of moments like that in this movie. It's also a very rushed movie. This movie is incredibly fast-moving, and you need to constantly be paying attention to understand what's happening. You need to be laser-focused to understand this movie in its full capacity. And a lot of the time, that can be fine, but there are some elements in the story that I felt were rushed in the first act. But there are elements of the story that I feel like were rushed in the first act, like the romance between two characters, like the main character and the girl I mentioned earlier. Like, they had really good ideas going there, because they started a relationship on the fly, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is happening so fast. How can you love somebody so much without even seeing their real face, and just seeing them as this virtual thing, and barely knowing them, only for a second? It happens so quick and so fast, and it's a big part of the movie. This romance is a big part of the plot and everything. So I really feel like they should have had more chemistry there. The actors don't have much chemistry. I like both characters, but they don't really have much chemistry between each other. They're just in love, and you just kind of have to accept it, and it just felt thrown in there. There's other things in this movie that also felt thrown in there. Like the government bad guy, played by Ben Mendelsohn. Like, if I were reading the script and I was reading this character, I would have thought that he sounded terrible, like a terrible character. But Ben Mendelsohn makes it work better than it does. Like, he's basically a power-hungry, angry guy, but Ben Mendelsohn makes it work better because he's such a likable actor and he's so charismatic and funny and enjoyable. Like, he's so funny throughout this movie. And with any other actor, he wouldn't have worked as good as he did. I really wish that there was more to him in this movie, for sure. Like, he definitely is not a good character per se, but Ben Mendelsohn just makes it work, kind of. It's still a problem, but he makes it work better, which is why it's not a big problem, I'm saying. And there's also character things that could have worked better. Like, the main character, like I said, has a crappy home life, and that's explored in 2 quick scenes, very quick scenes, and that is another thing that should have been explored more. Like, that should have been a big part to his character, but instead it just kind of pushed to the side because they need to keep the movie going. You can definitely tell that this is a movie based off a book that's very lengthy and it's very detailed, and it definitely shows at times and it hinders the movie. But there's so much incredible stuff about Ready Player One as well. Like, this movie, there are so many scenes where my jaw was literally dropped because I was enjoying what I was seeing so much, especially during that sequence, which is amazing. You'll know what sequence I'm talking about when you see the movie. It is incredible. My jaw was like, it was dropped the entire time. I'm gonna give Ready Player One a B+. I wish it was higher, but there are problems here, and there's definitely things that hinder it. And I also haven't read the book, but who cares? I don't need to read the book to critique a movie. But I kind of want to read the book now. Alright guys, if you like my review of Ready Player One, be sure to like this, be sure to subscribe, be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.